the functions and properties will get a chance to execute only when the objects are created. Communication mechanisms are established that provide the means by which the object work together. All the functions prototype are written at the beginning, and then the function definition, that means the main function, is written at the bottom. Hello and warm welcome to one and all. It is Dr. Ravikumar YB, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, MYSURU, the Temple of Excellence. In today's session, you will learn about the differences between function-oriented design and object-oriented design. In the previous session, you have learned about the details of function-oriented design and the object-oriented design. Now you will see the differences between those two. If that is the case, function-oriented design is the result of focusing attention to the functions or to the code or to the program. This is based on the stepwise refinement. That means how we can refine the segment of a code. That is very, very important here. The stepwise refinement is based on the iterative procedural decomposition. That means the functions are considered here as a modules. Each of these modules will address the problems of the system. If that is the case, the stepwise refinement is a top-down strategy where a program is refined as a hierarchy of increasing level of details. It is a top-down strategy. That is the function-oriented design, which is similar to C language, which is a structured-oriented language. So it requires the top-down strategy. So this is the meaning of it. It refines the functionalities of it in every iteration. Then function-oriented design starts with high-level descriptions of what the program does. That means in the form of a comments. Then in each step, we take one part of our high-level description and refine it. Refinement is actually the process of elaboration. That means expansion of the details of it is represented in the form of the elaboration. The process should proceed from a highly conceptual model to lower level details. The refinement of each module is done until we reach the statement level of our programming language. That means all these designs are converted into programming language level and it is used there. That is, the expansion is done till there. Moving on to the object-oriented design, it is a bottom-up approach. You shall see it here. Object-oriented design is a result of focusing attention not only on the functions performed by the program, but instead the data that are to be manipulated by the program. Please see the difference here. We will not focus on the functions. Instead, we focus on the data that are to be manipulated by the program. That is going to be concentrated by the object-oriented design. If that is the case, it is an orthogonal to function-oriented design. Object-oriented design begins with an examination of the real-world things. These things are characteristics individually in terms of their attributes and behavior. That means attributes indicates that the properties of that. Behaviors indicate the functions of that. So that is the meaning of that. If that is the case, objects are independent entities that may readily be changed because all states are representations. Information is held within the objects itself. That means the functions and properties will get a chance to execute only when the objects are created. That means the object may be distributed and may execute sequentially or in parallel. That means object-oriented technology contains the following keywords. The first one is objects. What is the meaning of objects here? For example, we have a package called car. C is equal to new car. What is this? This is an instance of that. It is creating an object here. So C dot, the function name, will invoke the function name here. From here. With this, I'm going to get the invocation of the functions from this. So software packages are designed and developed to correspond with real-world entities that contain all the data and services to function as their associated entity. messages. That means car is an object here, car C, where C is a class which contains both attributes or properties and functions, plus functions. So these properties and functions are invoked by whom? Object. So the function is the one which is holding. There is an encapsulation concept that helps you to bind the data items with the data members and member functions. So this process in turn will depend on functions, and functions will depend on objects. So there is a interlink, chain of interlink from one to the other. If that is the case, communication. Communication mechanisms are established that provide the means by which the object work together. That means when one of the object information needs to be shared with another object, we can do so with the help of sharing of data. Then methods, also called as a functions in object-oriented programming. That means methods are services that objects perform to satisfy the functional requirements of the problem domain. That means objects request services of other objects through messages. That means the communication in the form of messages. That means when one of the method sends a returned value to the main function, we say that there is a communication. Similarly, if the main function sends an actual argument to the formal argument, that is the values from actual argument to the formal argument, that is again a communication. So it is done in the form of messages. That means there is a communication from one of the method to another method, from main function to another function. That is called as a methods communication. Then moving on to that, we have the differences between function-oriented design and object-oriented design. With respect to the abstraction, we are using that the function-oriented design involves the abstractions which are given to user are real-world functions. Whereas in case of object-oriented design, objects and data entities, real-world entities are represented as the parameter for abstraction. With respect to functions, functions are grouped together by which a higher level of function is obtained. That means all the functionalities where one of the function performs one task and the second function performs second task, third function performs the third task, all these are combined together to form a single solution. That is the meaning of this. So high level function is obtained in this case of function oriented design. But in case of object oriented design, the functions are grouped together on the basis of data that they operate on, since the classes are associated with their methods. That means each of the classes will be having the functions along with the properties associated with that functions. If that is the case, state information. What is the meaning of state information? What is the present state of that? Whether it is executing or what? The approach is that the state information is often represented in the centralized shared memory in case of function-oriented design. But in case of object-oriented design, the state information is not represented in the centralized memory, but implemented or distributed among the objects of the system. That means a copy of the data, that means the data member and the member function is shared among multiple objects. That is called as a distributed way of computing. But in case of this, the single variable information is shared among multiple resources. There is no copy of that. So that's why we call it as a centralized shared memory details. It uses an approach of top-down approach, that is function-oriented language, whereas it uses the bottom-up approach, where the main function is written at the bottom. That means all the functions prototype are written at the beginning, and then the function definition, that means the main function is written at the bottom, and the execution always begins from the main function. So the main function is the one which is responsible for invoking all other functions. If that is the case, with respect to the criteria, begins by considering the use case diagrams and the scenarios. That means the diagrams used in this case of function oriented design, use case diagram. By identifying the objects and classes, the functionality of this begins. Decompose, that means we need to decompose or divide the big problem into smaller subproblem, that is the modularity. How can we do so in case of function oriented design? It is done with the help of function oriented design, called decomposition in function or procedure level. We do it. But in case of object oriented level, it is done at the class level. Similarly, use. How can we say that the use is one of the criteria? Can we reuse that? See here, this approach is mainly used for computation of sensitive applications, whereas in this case of this approach is mainly used for evolving system which mimics a business or business case. This is used for the real world operations. That is the main thing we need to consider here with respect to the object-oriented approach when we consider the use as the criteria. Then, design verification and validation process. What is the meaning of validation? Validating, that means whether all the requirements are working properly. That is the meaning of validation. Design validation is a process of evaluating the software product for the exact requirements of the end users or stakeholders. That means whatever the requirements of a stakeholders or end users are there are validated. That means all of the requirements are met properly. That is called as a validation process. The purpose of design validation is to test that the software product after the development is to ensure that it meets the requirements in terms of applications in the user's environment. That is the main thing here. Please see to it here. User requirements are given to the design input, as well as this design input is given to design output. This comes to the product. We will come to the design validation. Then, once it is validated, we also have one more requirement. That is, user comes up with few more requirements at later stage. Then we can do so and validate here. So with this, the validation is concerned with demonstrating the consistency and completeness of the design with respect to the user needs. Whether all of the requirements of a client are met or not is going to be checked. That is the completeness property. What is the meaning of consistency? The consistency means whether the requirements are working according to the requirements of client is validated. That is called as a design validation. That is called as a consistency. For every requirement, it has to work properly. For every data input given by the user, it has to work properly. That is called as a consistency. If that is the case, this is the stage where you are actually build a version of the product and validate against the user requirements. That means the user requirements are validated with the help of certain tools. Please see to this pictorial representation here. We have the first step, that is user environment setup, test site or prototype or simulator. This is prototype. So this is given to it, design input, procedure as per user requirements. Then we have this design outputs in the form of physical format, then validate the design, then it is given to the product development. Once again, if there is any refinement or any modification is to be done, we modify and use it once again. Once it is successfully incorporated, we will move on to the delivery of this. Successful validated design goes for production. Design verification and validation process also involves, the purpose of this is to prove that the objective evidence that product satisfies the documents of end users. Whether the documentation done at the beginning is checked once again during the time of validation. That means the objective evidence is nothing but any physical proof of the output, such as the image, text or audio file, which indicates that the procedure has been accomplished. That means the requirements of a client is documented in the form of a text, image or audio, is cross-verified at the time of validation to indicate that all of the requirements are met. Have been met by the design strategy. Though objective evidence, this process will consistently examine the product meets the predefined requirements. This process also involves testing activity like inspection and analysis and so on. With this, I'm concluding my session. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all.